Hey everyone, this is Danielle again. It's 5 past the hour, so we are going to get started. We had a few more people send in some responses. We have someone from Chapel Hill on the call, and we had someone say that they've been working in their garden. Oh, and we have somebody from Hickory. Thank you for joining us. And this person had some takeout from their favorite restaurant. That is great. Welcome to Conservation Conversations. Like I said, I'm Danielle Herman. I'm TLC's Communications Manager. In the wake of the rapidly changing COVID-19 pandemic, we hope that you are taking care of yourselves. In order to continue to connect with you while also practicing social distancing, TLC is excited to introduce its virtual series, Conservation Conversations. Every Wednesday evening through April, we will host a guest speaker or speakers who will share information about the work they are doing to make the Triangle a healthier and more vibrant region. You will have an opportunity to connect with the speaker through the Q&A section, and while we hope to answer most of your questions, please note that we may not be able to answer all of them in the time allotted. Please take a moment to locate the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Please submit your questions through this feature. You may also send us questions via email to advancement@triangleland.org. Please note that TLC staff and guest speakers are logging in remotely, so bear with us as the internet might be slower than normal. You may also hear an occasional dog bark or cat's meow, children, partners, or roommate voices. As you may know, TLC was founded in 1983 by a group of dedicated citizens who were concerned about balancing growth and conservation of open space in the Triangle region. Together with thousands of members, we've protected more than 20,000 acres of land and 141 miles of stream across Wake, Orange, Durham, Johnston, Lee, and Chatham counties. TLC strives to create a healthier and more vibrant Triangle region by safeguarding clean water, protecting natural habitats, supporting local farms and food, and connecting people with nature through land protection and stewardship, catalyzing community action and collaboration. Our work is possible because of the support of members like you and our sponsors. Tonight, I am joined by my colleagues Matt Rutledge, Associate Director of Stewardship, and Caroline Durham, Stewardship Associate. Matt grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and developed a love of the outdoors at an early age as his family spent time exploring the mountains of North and South Carolina. After obtaining a BA in history from the College of William and Mary, Matt returned home to Greenville, where he took classes in earth and environmental sciences at Furman University. During this time, he also served as an intern at the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities. Matt then moved to the Triangle area as he pursued a master's degree at the School of the Environment at Duke. He received a master's of environmental management with a concentration in energy and the environment and a master's of forestry management from Duke in December 2011. Matt brings additional internship experience from Environmental Defense Fund and the Southern Environmental Law Center, as well as experience in research settings as a technician in ecology and plant physiology labs at Duke. Matt joined TLC as a conservation fellow in May 2013 and accepted a permanent position as TLC's new easement steward in January 2014. Since then, he has been the associate manager of stewardship and now the associate director of stewardship. Caroline grew up in Hickory, North Carolina, spending most of her childhood outdoors exploring the North Carolina foothills. Caroline graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a BS in environmental sciences, concentrating in ecology and natural resources. During her time at UNC, she worked for a year as the North Carolina Botanical Gardens conservation intern, where she gained hands-on experience working for a conservation land manager. While in school, she also performed undergraduate research in plant ecology and on pine restoration techniques. After graduation, she went on to work for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission as the North Carolina Bird Conservation Technician. In this role, she supported the North Carolina Birding Trail and North Carolina Partners in Flight with extensive GIS analysis of Cornell's eBird database. Caroline joined TLC in April of 2018 as TLC's Stewardship Associate. She works with the stewardship team to manage monitoring and enforcement of TLC's conservation easements. Matt and Caroline, the webinar is now yours.
Thanks, Danielle. Can everyone hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Great. So thank you all for coming, and this is Conservation Conversations, Steering the Stewardship. I can't take credit for the title. That goes to my colleague Margaret, who is much more creative than I am. But we're going to talk a little bit today about TLC and our stewardship responsibilities. So TLC strives to create a healthier and more vibrant Triangle region by safeguarding clean water, protecting natural habitats, supporting local farms and food, and connecting people with nature through land protection and stewardship, catalyzing community action, and collaboration. That's our mission statement, and those are our 4 public benefits: clean water, natural habitats, local farms and food, and connecting people with nature. And this is our team. On the left there, you have a picture of most of our staff. On the top right is a lot of our stewardship staff. And then on the bottom right is our land manager, Walt Tysinger, who's giving some instructions on a recent volunteer workday. So who is TLC? Well, we are a accredited local land trust, accredited by the Land Trust Alliance. We work in 6 counties around the Triangle region: Chatham, Lee, Orange, Durham, Wake, and Johnston. We have protected over 21,000 acres since 1983 when we were founded. And we perform conservation through transfers, fee simple acquisitions, or conservation easements. And if you want to hear more about how we do conservation and conservation projects, I encourage you to look up our previous conservation conversation by Margaret Sands. I believe it's on YouTube, and there's a link on our website. So what is stewardship? So this is a definition that really appeals to me, and that is an ethic that embodies the responsible planning and management of resources. And TLC protects land in perpetuity, which means we also have to take care of that land forever. And there are a variety of ways we do this, both for our owned land and our easements. And I'll be talking mostly today about our owned land. But this is just a map of our region, and the 6 counties, the dark greens is our priority areas. And you can see all the green dots for our projects spread out over our region. And I like to show this map because it just shows how large of a region that we cover, and how far apart some of our projects are, which can be a challenge in and of itself. So when TLC acquires a property, we then have to steward that land in perpetuity, and we own over 6,200 acres spread over those 6 counties. And many of these are remote and can be difficult to access. And that can make keeping eyes on the property a little bit difficult. For example, this is a cypress swamp on the Neuse River in the picture, and it requires us to cross a stream, go through a wooded area, and then follow some railroad tracks for several hundred yards before getting to our property. And issues that come up on some of our own properties include trespassing, encroachment from neighbors, and dumping is always a big one. Mattresses and couches are especially popular. Anything that would cost money to take to a waste management facility, we usually find on our property. Another challenge, and also a way that people can connect with TLC, is through hunting. TLC does allow hunting on certain properties. We work with hunters that we know, or people that approach us and are interested. We do work exchanges or cash leases. All hunters have to have insurance, and we sign a lease with them, and they can help us keep eyes on some of these properties. And illegal hunting can also be an issue, so having some eyes on the property can help with that. This picture is an illegal stand that we confiscated on one of our properties. TLC does engage in active land management. So when we acquire a parcel, we don't always just leave it and let it go. It depends on the property. In the picture on the top left is removing some invasive species. So we remove invasive species in order to restore native species. Forest management and prescribed burning we do on several properties, and that is to improve biodiversity and wildlife habitat. Some of the properties that we do some of this active land management include Temple Flat Rock, Horton Grove, White Pines, Brumley, and Williamson Preserve, which I will talk a little bit more about later. So we do use prescribed fire or prescribed burning. We have 4 certified burners on staff, and we also always work with a contractor who is very experienced and also comes with insurance, which is very important. And some of the reasons we use prescribed fire: it reduces wildfire risk by reducing the fuel loads. It encourages native vegetation, which is fire adapted, and it provides habitat for fire dependent species. So in the top right is a woodcock, or a timber doodle, as some people call them. That was one. That was a picture I actually took on a prescribed burn, and it flew out of a area as the fire approached and hunkered down in a wooded area nearby. When we do a prescribed burn, we have to put together a burn plan, and that bottom right is a snapshot of what a burn plan looks like. We submit our plan to the North Carolina Forest Service, and in it we talk about where we're going to burn, how much acreage, the fuel that we expect there, how much fuel, and then our containment measures, where our burn lines will go, who's in charge of the burn, things like that. And the Forest Service will actually use the area and estimated fuel loads to estimate the smoke and the air pollution, and we have to abide by all EPA regulations. So if air pollution that day is too high, they can actually shut down all burning. On the bottom left is our land manager, Walt Heisinger, at a recent burn. I just thought that was a great picture. We do some forest management on some of our properties. And this is always to improve the habitat and improve the biodiversity, and which usually means taking out loblolly pine. We have a Stewardship Advisory Council, which is a group of outside experts that we use to help guide management decisions. These are folks from the Natural Heritage Program, NC State, and Duke University, Audubon, state parks, groups like that we can bring in and present a management plan to and get their comments and feedback. TLC's forestry policy requires that we have a goal like wildlife habitat or something like that in mind. We must have it approved by the Stewardship Advisory Council, and any revenue is put back into stewardship. So the pictures on the right, this is actually at our White Pines Preserve. And White Pines is named because it has a unique disjunct population of white pines trees, which are normally a mountain species. And we believe this is a remnant population from the last ice age. There is an adjacent international paper plantation that was donated to TLC that was a loblolly pine stand. And we actually thinned it out and created some group openings. We collected seed from the white pine trees on site to maintain that unique genetic genotype, and then had volunteers plant them out. They were grown out, the seeds were grown out by the North Carolina Forest Service nursery, and then we planted over 2,000 of these trees in an area. So we're removing a plantation, a monoculture, and we're restoring a native forest type. TLC also owns and operates 7 nature preserves, and many of you are probably familiar with those. 6 are free and open to the public. One is a farm preserve that it hosts a refugee farming operation, and also Learning Outside, which is a camp for kids. But these 6 preserves have over 35 miles of trail, including 10 miles that allow mountain biking. And as you can imagine, that can present some management challenges, just in terms of, if a bad storm comes through, clearing down trees and things like that off the trail can sometimes take a couple weeks. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about some of those management challenges on our preserves. Wildlife challenges are a big one. This is a view of the Beaver Dam at our Brumley Nature Preserve. This is a beaver dam on Stony Creek. And natural impacts from floods and hurricanes, and then human impacts as well, from wear and tear on the trails to vandalism. So this is actually a picture of the pond created by the beaver dam that I just showed you. And what you can't see in this picture is one of our trails went right through the middle of this pond. And so after the beaver built the dam up, we actually rerouted our trail system to go around this area. It's a little bit of an inconvenience for us, but it created some great habitat for some wood ducks, which we were kind of happy about. This is a natural event. This is the Deep River. After some of the heavy rains we had a couple years ago, you can probably see our trail sign for our very aptly named river trail down in the bottom left, and it was under about 3 feet of water. So once the water recedes, we have to go in, clear up any debris, muddy sections or washed out sections of the trail we have to repair. And actually at White Pines, we put in more trails, which were higher up the bluffs away from the creek. So even during times when the river floods, people can still enjoy the preserve. This is our Brumley Preserve, and I'll let you guess which is the before and which is the after picture. But we had some vandalism, which is not common, but does happen. And apparently someone decided to burn down our portable toilets and must have used a lot of gasoline. But we've also had things like our kiosks have been set on fire, various management challenges. Normally, most of our management challenges around human impacts involve wear and tear on the trails, unauthorized vehicles, things like that. And we need you, just not right now. We do rely on volunteers for all aspects of our management, but right now all our volunteer work days have been suspended because of the COVID-19 outbreak. But once they do start up again, they include things like trail building, trash removal, invasive species removal, tree planting. We do have volunteers on prescribed burns. We have office work days if anybody wants to get into the office. And some volunteers monitor some of our own properties. TLC is also starting a volunteer easement monitoring program, and you can check out our website for information on how to sign up for some of those emails. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about our Williamson Preserve, which is opening soon and was going to open on April 25th of this year, just 3 weeks or so from now, 2.5 weeks. But it has been postponed. But regenerative agriculture is up and running. Those are a couple of the cows out on the site. If folks are interested in the agriculture out there, there was a great conservation conversation a couple weeks ago by Eliza Laudley, the farm manager out at Williamson Preserve, and talking about all the things that we have going on right now and future plans as well. So I encourage you to check that out. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other stewardship we have going on out there, give you an idea of what it takes to kind of open a preserve. Trail construction is still moving forward. We have a contractor who is working out there. We also have a restoration project of longleaf pine that we're working on as well. So when TLC works on a trail system, we come up with a preliminary design, and we work in consultation with some professional trail builders to kind of refine that design. Once we have a preliminary design, we have to fund the trail system through grants or other fundraising efforts. Trail building through a contractor costs an average of about $4 a linear foot. So it's over $20,000 a mile, excuse me. So they can be expensive. So raising the money, the biggest grant source is through the Recreational Trails Program, which is a federal grant program. Money comes from an excise tax on off-road vehicle fuel. It's then dispersed through the states, and we apply through state parks. Once we have funding in hand, then we have to permit the trails. So on the bottom left is a stream delineation that I worked on with the Division of Water Resources at the state. And I put together a preliminary stream map, and they came out and confirmed it. And that's just one of the steps to get a riparian buffer authorization for the Neuse River. We also had to get clearances from the Army Corps of Engineers to say our trails would not impact surface waters as part of the Clean Water Act. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to sign off that we wouldn't impact threatened or endangered species, and we had to put together a sedimentation and erosion control plan for our trail system. Trail construction involves volunteers and professional trail builders. TLC works with professional trail builders because, for one thing, they can be out there all the time, which means they can build a lot faster. And they also, in steep terrain, they can really provide the finished product that holds up well. And all TLC trails utilize sustainable trail design. And this is a method of preventing water from eroding the trail. Some old trails that you may be familiar with go straight up and down the slope and have lots of water bars to divert water. Sustainable trail design goes around the slope, goes on the side slope, and ascends and descends slowly and has switchbacks. And that way water is not diverted and it doesn't start to channelize and erode the trail. On the bottom right are some of our kiosks, our Horton Grove Preserve. We put those in, and then we will work with our communication staff to put together signage that include things like maps, some information about what's at the preserve, and some other things. We're also working on a longleaf restoration at Williamson Preserve. When we acquired the property, several fields were enrolled in the CRP program, or the Cropland Reserve Program, which is a federal program that basically leases farmland for wildlife. We re-enrolled one field in Conservation Practice 36, which is longleaf. We worked with a consulting forester who was experienced with longleaf and put together a conservation plan. The snapshot in the top left is a bit of our conservation plan and our schedule of events. And then on the bottom left is our first prescribed burn out in that area to prepare for planting. So the CRP program provides some cost share funding to establish longleaf pine. We were able to pair that with funding from Appalachian Mountain Brewing. They have a longleaf IPA, and for every case they sell, they will plant one longleaf tree. And so they gave us some money to purchase some longleaf seedlings, and we actually had an event around Valentine's Day for the love of longleaf, where volunteers planted almost 6,000 longleaf pine seedlings. On the bottom left is a member of the North Carolina Forest Service. He is the state pine silviculturalist, out helping us plant some longleaf seedlings, which I thought was pretty cool. We didn't have great survival, and we're not quite sure why, but we think it has mostly to do with some weather-related events. So we had to go ahead and replant some longleaf this winter. And that is an ongoing project that will continue for a number of years. That's some of what we have going on at our Williamson Preserve. This is our restored pack house, which has become a farm office. But I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what we have going on out there and what goes into getting a preserve ready. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Caroline Durham, who will talk about one of our other priorities, and that's conservation easements.
Thank you, Matt. So my name is Caroline, and I manage our conservation easements stewardship, which might be the lesser known stewardship for many of you. Let's see. Sorry, I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. All right, are we up and running now?
Yes, it looks good.
Perfect. Sorry about that, everybody. So as I was saying, I manage our conservation easement stewardship. So first, I'll go over what exactly is a conservation easement. So a conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust that permanently limits the uses of the land in order to protect its conservation values. And so each of these conservation easements are unique to the landowner, their goals, and their property. Some of our more well-known conservation easements might be Green Button Farm, who raises sustainable hogs for the Picnic Barbecue Restaurant in Durham. And then we have Maple View Farm, which is protected in 1995. If you've been there, maybe you've enjoyed some nice ice cream or milk. I always stop and get ice cream when I'm there for a monitoring visit, as evidenced by the photo there. And then we have Sug Farm out in Holly Springs at Bass Lake Park, which is protected in 2008. And then we also have Joslyn Garden in Raleigh that was protected in 1997. So you might be familiar with some of these properties, maybe not. So these are just 4 out of our 100 conservation easements that we hold across 8,200 plus acres across all 6 of our counties with 70 or more private landowners. Some of those landowners are married, so 70 plus, but many of our landowners actually have multiple easements on their properties. So that's why maybe those that conservation easement number and the private landowner number doesn't quite add up. And so I mentioned earlier that it is a voluntary legal agreement. So like any legal agreement, we see that a conservation easement is a piece of paper. And it involves restrictions on the property. The biggest one is that your property can no longer be developed, so it can't be subdivided. Other things may be restricted within the easement, like paving and road construction, trash. We don't want a golf course to be built over your property. And then along with those restrictions, we also have rights that can be retained by the grantor for future use. So if someone thinks that in the future on their property, they might need to build another barn, we can write that into the easement and say those rights retained by this landowner includes that they will need to build another barn down the line. And just a little more about conservation easements. So a landowner still owns the land. They manage the land. They can sell it or pass it on to their heirs. I mentioned earlier that it removes the potential for development, which decreases the land's market value, which in turn will lower the property value of the property and lower that estate tax. So I've mentioned that every easement is different, catered to each landowner. And the land trust is responsible for enforcing the restrictions in the easement. In the land trust in that situation is TLC. So we follow stewardship and enforcement guidelines set by the Land Trust Alliance. So we keep mentioning that we're an accredited land trust. And so what exactly does that mean? We were accredited by the Land Trust Alliance in 2016, I believe. And the LTA sets high standards for land conservation. So they set guidelines for how to operate legally, ethically, and responsibly, and they give us 12 guiding principles as a land trust to go by. And number 11 is that land trusts have a program of responsible stewardship for their conservation easements. And so some of these standards for conservation easement stewardship include monitoring each of those 100 properties at least annually, documenting each monitoring activity. Each visit we make, we create a report that includes maps and photos of that visit. We are required to maintain strong relationships with those 70 plus landowners, and we actually have to enforce the restrictions in those easements and make sure that the conservation easements aren't experiencing neighbors dumping over the line or an inappropriate house being built on the property. So annual monitoring can kind of be broken down into 3 sections. So first is before I even leave the office, I look into the documents related to the property, so the baseline documentation report, the conservation easement, prior monitoring reports, and then the next portion is actually going and visiting the site, and then afterwards reporting my monitoring visit. So this that I'm showing you now is an example of a baseline documentation report for a property. So we actually create a baseline documentation report before we even sign the conservation easement agreement. So we create this report to write down all of the different natural and man-made characteristics of the property. So you can see here we have the general location, a soil map, the forest or natural community types and photos. And so we're really using this as a baseline to refer back to for any changes that might happen in the future. And this is an example of a monitoring report. So before I go out and visit a property, I like to look back at the monitoring report from the previous year and just kind of go over any changes that occurred. And I especially like to look at the route that I walked the year before, because most privately owned land doesn't have trails right around the boundary or anything. So it's helpful to see what route was easiest to go. So then I will take a look at this monitoring report and then take another look at the conservation easement. The conservation easement is actually the guiding document that we look to for our restrictions to enforce the easement. So when we're out on the property, we're actually looking at any of these restrictions, making sure that everything looks good and that everything is being met the way it's supposed to. So while we're out on the site, I always encourage the landowner to meet with me and walk with me, talk about the property. I like to know what changes have happened and if they plan to make any changes in the future. We typically walk the property boundaries. And this is because we trust the landowner understands the restrictions within the conservation easement, but maybe they don't get out to their property boundaries very often, and typically along the boundaries is where we might see a violation occur. So it could be a neighbor that dumps trash over the line, or it could be someone that cuts trees across the line, or something like that. That wouldn't be the fault of the landowner per se, but just sometimes they might not get out there and see it. So then we take photos at each corner. This offers a sense of consistency. So one year, maybe we'll take a picture and there will be a forest. And the following year we'll take a picture and something might look off. We'll come back to the office and compare it to the year before and see that, you know, there were trees there last year and there aren't this year. So maybe something is different. And on top of that, we visit any areas of interest. For example, if there was an issue in last year's monitoring or someone built a barn, I would go out and visit that area, document it, and make sure we know what's happening for the following year. And after that, I would create my monitoring report based on my visit. So I would include my photo points on this map that shows where I went and what pictures I took, and then actually including the pictures. And then if there are any stakeholders involved in the project, like if the state helped us fund it, I would send my report to them and let them know that we've got eyes on the property and that everything looks good. So hopefully everything stops there, and I'm on to thinking about the next property. But if I do visit a property and there is an issue, I would come back and maybe consult TLC's Easement Enforcement policy. And so this is when we suspect there might be a violation of the terms of the conservation easement. And so the Easement Enforcement policy has 3 tiers of increasing violation severity. And these tiers represent threats to the conservation values of the property. So if we issue a violation report, if we think there is something that goes against the terms of the easement, then the goal is always to have the landowner restore the property back to pre-violation conditions. We obtain terra firma easement defense in case a landowner refuses to work with us on restoring the property. These conservation easements are legally binding, so we could sue the landowner and terra firma would support us in the case of litigation. I just wanted to include some examples of violations that we've had in the past because people like to know what we've seen before. So in this example on the left of this 2018 violation, I was out on my first solo monitoring visit, and I looked up and saw this 10-foot pile of debris across the easement line. And I thought to myself, you know, that doesn't look right. And I took a lot of pictures, and then I came back and read the conservation easement where it said that dumping of soil, trash, ashes, garbage, waste, abandoned vehicles, appliances, or machinery or other materials on the easement area is prohibited. So in that instance, I issued a violation, and we were able to just have the person who committed the violation pull the pile of debris out of the easement, and there was no further damage involved after that. In this example of a 2017 violation on the right, it was an interesting situation where a woman was trying to sell her property and went down to the river and cut some limbs from her trees to increase the view shed. So whoever bought her property would be wowed by the view of the river. And when she realized what she had done, she actually called TLC and turned herself in for committing the violation. And as it turned out, the language in her easement did agree that she committed a violation. So we issued a violation, and the issue never happened again. And so I also wanted to touch on our Landowner Communications. As an accredited land trust, we are required to maintain strong relationships with landowners. And we do this by sending landowner letters every time we wish to visit the property for annual monitoring. Usually those letters will invite the landowner to join us on the monitoring visit, give us a call if they have any questions, and just let us know if they need anything or any resources from us. We also send out a newsletter twice a year called the StewardShip Journal. This is a newsletter exclusively for our landowners that discusses management challenges, might talk about wildlife issues, prescribed burning, and this is just a fun way to connect with our landowners that feels special to them. We also send out new landowner packets for anyone that owns a conservation easement property that sells their property to a new landowner. We try to make contact with that landowner right away, let them know who we are, welcome them to our conservation family, and explain the restrictions of the easement so that there is no confusion moving forward and so that they are less likely to commit a violation in the future. And then I mentioned those reserved rights in the conservation easement. So if someone did have written into their easement that they can build a barn later on down the line, we require typically that those reserved rights are approved by TLC before the barn is actually built. So I always encourage landowners to give me a call if they have any questions about the reserved rights or anything else in their easement, or to seek approval from us or something like that. And just try to make it as easy as possible for them to reach out to me and keep that line of communication strong. And that's about all I have for conservation easement stewardship. So if you have any questions, please reach out in the question and answer chat box, and Matt and I would love to answer them.
Thank you, Matt and Caroline. That was great. We have had a few questions come in, and as a reminder, folks, you can keep asking questions using the Q&A box. Our first question is, how can I sign up to hunt TLC property?
Well, that's a good question. So you can contact the stewardship staff at TLC. Typically what we do, if most of our properties are hunted right now, so we don't have any open but if you have a property in mind and it is being hunted, we will put you in touch with the current hunter on that property who we have a lease with. And if you can work out an arrangement with that hunter, we would be glad to extend that lease to you as well. But that is our typical method at this point, because all of our properties where we allow hunting have active leases on them.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked, how much, if any, guidance do you utilize when working on stream determinations and when submitting and securing permits when building trails?
That's a great question. So stream delineation is not one of my, not in my toolkit at this point. But in working with Division of Water Resources, we were able to get the stream delineation done. For phase 2 of the trails at Williamson, it involves, it was a little bit more involved. There were some wetlands on the property. It was within the FEMA 100-year floodplain. So we actually wrote a grant, or a part of a grant, we wrote it in there, get some engineering support, and they helped guide that permitting process. So we have done some of it in-house when it is fairly straightforward, but in more complicated situations, we have gone with professional engineers.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Okay, this same person asked, do you still run a preserved steward program? If so, what are the steward's primary duties?
We do. We have a what we call our site steward program, and this is active mostly on our nature preserves. And we ask volunteers to go out at least once a quarter, but to especially focus on going out after some large-scale events like flooding or bad storms, a hurricane, something like that. Walk the trails and let us know if there's any damage, trees down across the trails, any issues with flooding. Sometimes bridges get washed out, things of that nature. So it's about 4 times a year, and mainly just walking our trails.
Great, thank you. Someone asked, are you going to get into drones for watching properties or any other reason?
You want to take that one, Caroline?
Sure. So yeah, we actually own a drone at TLC, but our only drone pilot left last year. So there are a couple of people that are working to become certified drone pilots right now through the FAA. So in the future, yes, I think that we will utilize drones for monitoring conservation easements, keeping an eye on our owned properties, and just for really cool photography.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Someone asked, when an easement agreement is signed with a property owner and is then inherited by another person, does the easement continue?
That is a great question. I'm sorry I didn't answer that more clearly earlier. Yes, so the easement is on the property in perpetuity. So we only do permanent conservation easements. So even if a landowner puts a conservation easement on their property, sells it to someone who sells it to someone who sells it to someone else, that easement will always be there and will be there in perpetuity. So it's a very permanent way to restrict the use of the land.
Next question, who do I contact to become a site steward?
That's a great question. You can check out our website. There is a link to our volunteer page, and on there will be instructions to sign up for Volunteer Hub, And once you create a profile, you can select all the activities you would like to receive information about. And I believe the Site Steward program is on there.
Yes, and we can include a link to Volunteer Hub in our email that we'll send y'all tomorrow. We're not doing volunteer activities right now, obviously, but for the future. See, someone asked, how can I support stewardship efforts at TLC?
Great question. One way, as we've mentioned, is by volunteering, but another way is by becoming a member, or if you already are a member, by renewing your membership. So TLC is a member-based organization, and the majority of our support does come from our members around the Triangle who like what we do and support us.
And that's kind of tied to another question we have. Someone asked, how do you pay for stewardship you have to do in perpetuity?
That's a great question. So when we acquire properties, both owned properties and conservation easements, when we do the transaction, we try to also acquire a stewardship endowment. And that is money that will go into TLC stewardship endowment and can be used to, it rolls off some interest every year and can help pay for stewardship activities. It's especially important for conservation easements, but our owned land as well. And conservation easements also have a legal defense fund. Caroline, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So each time a conservation easement closes, each of our landowners has to pay a certain amount of transaction cost that include going into that stewardship endowment and the legal defense fund in case we ever have to defend one of our easements in court. Kind of like I talked about earlier. We have terra firma easement defense to help us out, but in case that's not enough, it's very important to have that reserve fund just in case we do have to defend the terms of our easements.
Thank you, Caroline. And our last question, unless someone else has another they would like to submit, how many volunteers do you have help with trail building and monitoring?
That's a great question. It's been going up every year, and that's I think because of both the excitement that people see when we open new nature preserves, and the fact that we have a great community engagement coordinator and a good team there that really reaches out and gets people involved. We also have Volunteer Hub, which has helped streamline operations. But we have several thousand people who volunteer every year and provide several thousand hours, volunteer hours. We have people that come once a week, most weeks, and some that just volunteer every once in a while. So there's the whole range.
Thank you. We had one more question come in. Someone asked, how much support do you get from local and state governments?
That's a good question. A lot of the support from local and state government can come in the form of support for individual land projects. For example, our Williamson Preserve was supported by the Clean Water Management Trust Fund from the state, which is a fund that protects land around streams to preserve water quality. It was also supported by both Wake and Johnston counties. So that was an example of a specific land project, specific land acquisition that was supported by state and local governments. I mentioned the Recreational Trails Program, which is a grant for our trail building, which comes through state parks. In terms of operational support, there is a program called the Upper Neuse Clean Water Initiative, and this is a program around Raleigh's watershed, which is Falls Lake, and Raleigh has a rider on their water bills. I think it's 5 cents per 1,000 gallons, though someone might have to check me on that. But that money is available both for projects, and it also provides some staff support to get projects going in that watershed.
Great, thank you. Well, if we don't have any more questions, that concludes this conservation conversation, Steering the Stewardship. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and thank you, Matt and Caroline, for sharing your expertise. Please join us next week for Conservation Conversations, Learning in Nature. Our friends Wendy Banning, Director and co-founder of Learning Outside, and Marty Jorgensen, Program Director at Schoolhouse of Wonder, will be joining TLC AmeriCorps member Alicia Senef to share outdoor education activities for kids. So it should be a fun one. Please stay safe, stay healthy, continue to wash your hands. Thank you again so much for joining us, and take care, y'all.